All right, let's continue. Now we're going to leave our boss alone for a little bit, and we're going to switch to our player. Now it's interesting, if I go down to my rooms and open up the game room, you'll see our player object is already sitting in there, but when we run the game, it disappears. So why should that be? Well, I'll show you here in just a minute. Well, let's play a little bit with our player object. The boss object works, sort of similar to what we've already done. As I said in our previous lesson, it moves on its own and it reverses direction when it hits a wall, basically. But our player object we want to control by using the keyboard. So this is something a bit different than what we've done before. We're going to start off then with the step event. And for the step event, we're going to go ahead and have a script that we call that's going to do a whole bunch of stuff. So let's go up to our scripts again and look at the player and choose player step and open that up. All right, if we want to have an object move in reaction to keyboard presses, whether the player is pressing the key down or up or holding the key down, we can make use of some built-in functions. So we're going to start off with an if statement, and what we want to do is we want to check if the player is pressing the up key, then we want to move up toward the top of the screen. If the player is pressing the down key, then we want to move down the screen. And then otherwise, if they're not pressing anything, then we want them to not move. Okay, so let's start with this if part. So the built-in function for this is called keyboard underscore check, and you see there are a different variety of these things. If we use keyboard check, just keyboard check and then key, what that will do is that as long as the player is holding the key down, it will continue to be called step, 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 right? So let's do that. Where if we do this check keyboard press, the player has to press the key and release it and then press it again in order for it to be checked. So we want this one for now. And how do we figure out which key is being pressed? Well, here too there are some built-in variables that are associated with specific keys. And so we're going to check the one that's called V key up. V key means virtual key. So if V key up is being clicked, then we want to do something. And what do we want to do? Oh, you should know this. We just created this great utility script called set direction speed, and we can make use of that again here. We want to go up, which is 90 degrees, and at some speed, we'll say 16. We're going to make the player move really quickly. That's it. Let's copy this and duplicate it, and now we can say what happens if they're pressing the down key. Well, we want to move down then, which is 270 for the degrees, and we'll keep the speed the same. We're going to do a whole bunch more with this step event, but let's give this one right here a try for now. Come down to our player object, into the step event, and we will call player, step. We have to do one more thing. I mentioned that even though the player object is in the room, you can't see it. The reason you can't see it is that if you look at our list of events, one of the events we're using is draw. And we're going to use this draw event associated with our player in order to draw a health bar right above the player's head to let you know if you're being damaged, essentially the level of damage that's been given to the player. There's something you have to be careful about when you use this draw event. As soon as you attach a draw event to an object, that draw event will override the built-in draw event that is inside GameMaker. So it's going to assume that all the stuff that you want to draw associated with this dragon is going to be sort of laid out here inside this action. But we don't have anything in here. So what happens is that we're saying, hey, we're going to take over the drawing, but then we don't say anything. And so GameMaker just ignores this dragon and doesn't draw it. So we need to say draw self. And that will then draw our dragon. Okay, hey, now we can see him. And I'm pressing the up key and I'm pressing the down key, and you can see he's moving pretty quickly. And he can go off the edge of the screen, which is useful when you're making your game. You can hide your character off the edges of the room. You'll also notice, or I guess you can't see this, but if I release the keys, he doesn't stop. He just keeps moving forever, and that's not what I want to occur. I want it to work so that when I let go of a key, he stops. So we need to take care of that. I wonder if you can guess what would need to happen in order for that to work. Think about it for a second, and then I'll show you. So here we are in the step event. We're calling this player step function, which is a script. If I want to immediately open this, watch this. I can click with my middle mouse button, and it'll instantly go to that script. So the way we can make it so that our player stops moving if no key is being pressed is right at the beginning of this step event, we're going to yet again call this very useful set direction speed function, and we're going to pass it 0 for direction and 0 for speed. It actually doesn't matter what direction you point it because we've set the speed to 0, but we'll do it anyway. Now, when I hit play, he's sitting there, he's not moving. As soon as I press a button and release it, he moves, but then he stops. And if I hold down the key, then he will move up and down. Sweet. Well, things are moving along well now. We've got our player, we've got our bad guy. Now let's start creating some objects that we can instantiate in the game in real time. And start them moving around the screen and interacting with other objects. This is kind of a basic fundamental feature of video games, right? The first one we're going to work with is the fire object. This is going to be an object that our dragon can fire off at the bad guys. So if I open up our fire object, you'll see we've got a create event, a collision with a baby dragon, a collision with a demon, and then an outside room event. And we'll talk more about that in a second. We've used these collision and create events before. So we want to have something occur when the fireball first appears in the room. And what is it we want to have happen? Ooh, you're going to be an expert at this very quickly. Well, we want it to move in a certain direction at a certain speed. So yet again, we can call this set direction speed. Now we want it to move to the right, which is 0 degrees at some speed. I'm going to make it really fast. So I'll set it at 32 pixels per step. And that's it. So that's easy enough. We can make it move. But how is it that we get this ball of fire to appear out in the room? Well, we do that through our player. We've got our step event. It's calling this script. And right now we're checking to see if they press the keys up or down to move. But you know, there's nothing stopping us from using this same thing to check for a button we want to use to fire fireballs. And what I'll use is space. And here, though, I'm going to do something slightly different. I don't want the player to be able to just hold down the space bar and fire off an endless stream of fireballs. So instead of using keyboard check, if I want to make it so they have to press the button and then release the button and then press the button again, in order to have it work, I can use keyboard check pressed. Right? And we don't want to set a direction or speed anymore. Instead, we want to create an instance of that fireball each time the player presses the space bar. So to do that, we've got yet another built-in function which allows us to create an instance. Instance create. And when we create an instance, we have a couple of options. We can create the instance on a specific layer in our room, or we can create the instance at a specific depth. Most of the time in this class, we're going to be using instance create layer. And then we need to say, where do we want to position the instance? What's the ID or name of the layer? And which object do we want to create an instance of at that location and on that layer? Well, X and Y are fairly straightforward, but what does this mean? Layer ID or name? Let me finish typing this out. Layer. Well, if we go back to our room, come into the game room, and you'll remember we've already started talking about aspects of the room editor, and one key aspect is the fact that you have the ability to create multiple layers in your room, and that by default you'll have a background layer and a single instances layer. We're not going to create other layers in this game, but we certainly could. But we have this instances layer, so when instance create layer is looking for the name or the ID of a layer, this is what it's looking for. So we can pass it a string with the name of the layer where we want to place our fireball. So I'm going to just go ahead and place it on the instances layer. So let's try that. So first of all, where are we going to put it for the X? Well, this is kind of tricky, I guess. If we say, let's say 0. And then for the X, and we say 0 for the Y. Where is that fireball going to be created? It's going to be created in the upper left-hand corner of the room, which is not what we want. In fact, what we want is we want it to look like the fireball is coming out of the mouth of the player, of that dragon. So how do we make that happen? Well, you remember the dragon itself has an X and Y coordinate, so we can say X, or if you really want to be careful, you can say self.x. And then you can add some value to it. Let's say 100. That'll take us 100 pixels to the right. And our dragon object, our dragon sprite, like our boss sprite, has its origin in the upper left-hand corner. So we're going to say, all right, go over 100 pixels this way. And that should work pretty well. Let's go back down to our player here. There we go. And open up our player step. All right, so we're going to say go to X plus 100. And I know I don't usually use this self, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm just going to say X plus 100, and that X is referring to the object that this is hooked to, which is the dragon. For our X, and for our Y, we're going to say take our current Y and add 10 to it, which is going to move it down 10 pixels in the image. Then we need to say which layer do we want. We pass it the name of the layer, instances, as a string. Then we have to say which object do we want to create a copy of or an instance of. Well, we want the fire object. And that should do it. So let's see what that looks like. Hit start. If I press the space bar, each time I press it, I get a fireball that goes shooting out. I'm pressing a whole bunch of times here in the background, and I get a whole ton of fireballs. Hey, that works pretty well. I want to do a little bit of cleanup here with the fireball itself. Let's come back to the fireball. And the cleanup I want to start with is this event, outside room event. If I click on the add events, you'll see there's a section here called other. And in other, there are a collection of things: outside the room, intersect boundary, game start and end, room start and end. There are a bunch of different sort of events that don't really fit with everything else. And we're going to use this specific one, which is outside the room, which is just what it sounds like. When this object completely leaves the room, we want to perform some action. And the action we wanted to perform is to destroy this fireball. If we don't destroy it, it will continue to live in memory in the computer. Each of them that we create will continue to live, and that eventually can eat up the memory of the game. So we're going to destroy it by saying instance destroy, which we've used before. All right, that's a nice cleaning. Sweet. All right, so now we have a fireball that we can shoot off toward the bad guy. But it doesn't really do anything. And in fact, if you look at what we can collide with here, I've set it up so we can collide with the babies, which would be bad since we're trying to save the babies, and it can hit the demons, which would be good because we want to kill the demons, right? And so why don't we set up one of these demons so that we can have something bad coming toward the player, and then we'll make it so this fireball can hurt it. That'll be next. All right, let's do it. So let's we'll go ahead and close down our fireball here, and let's give some attention now to our demon. And it's going to function pretty similarly to our fireball. Now our fireball, when it is created, we had it moving directly from wherever our player was, straight toward the right-hand side of the screen and then off the screen. We're going to make our demons a little tougher. Rather than having them all shoot straight out toward the player, we want to have them move either slightly toward the top of the screen, slightly towards the bottom of the screen, or straight across towards the player. And to do that, we will call once again upon our set direction speed utility script, but now for the direction, instead of just picking a specific direction, we're going to use another built-in function called choose. And what you do with choose is that you pass in a collection of numbers, and then GameMaker will randomly pick one of the numbers that you pass. So we're going to say 120, which is sort of heading slightly toward the top of the screen but moving toward the right, or 180, which is directly toward the right, or 220, which is sort of toward the right but down. And for the speed, I'll say 12. Right. So this same utility function, but now we're making it even trickier by choosing one of 3 different potential directions each time one of these demons gets created. Sweet. All right. What do we want to do with this? Well, we want to make a couple of things happen. We want it to be the case that if this demon hits the player, then the player is going to receive some damage. And we want to make it so that if the player shoots a fireball and the fireball hits the demon, then we want to actually destroy the demon. So let's start with the fireball part of this. So we'll close this down for now. And we'll come back into our fireball. And here's our collision with the demon. And what are we going to do if it hits the demon? Well, the easiest thing to do, oh boy, we're going to end up doing a lot of things with this. The easiest thing to do is to simply destroy the demon. So let's start with that. Instance destroy. Now, when I say instance destroy, here's a question for you. What gets destroyed? Here's our fireball colliding with the demon. We say instance destroy. Well, the thing that gets destroyed is the thing that this is attached to, which is the fireball, which is good. We want to do that. We want to destroy the fireball. But we also want to destroy the demon. So to make that happen, we have to make use of something called whiff. And if I say whiff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, in this collision, the thing that we're colliding with is the thing I want to have something happen to. So I need to say with what? And when there's a collision, there is the caller and there's the receiver. And the receiver is called other. So we're saying, hey, now what's going to come after this is going to happen to this guy, not to this guy. And then all I have to say is instance destroy, if I can spell it right. So we'll destroy this guy, and we'll destroy this guy. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it doesn't look like anything yet, right? Because those guys don't appear. Well, that's no good. We need to make these demons appear. Well, how did we make the fireballs appear? We made the fireballs appear by checking for when the player clicked on the space bar. Clearly that's not going to work here because there's no space bar being checked for the boss. It's just sort of moving on its own, but we'd like to have the boss produce these demons regularly, but sort of at random. So how is that going to happen? Yowza. All right, get ready, and I'll show you. So what we want to have occur is every once in a while, sort of at random, the boss is going to spit out one of those demons, which will then fly across the screen. So here in our boss step event, I'm going to put a little space up here at the top. You remember we used in the earlier project this built-in function called IRandomRange. And what we did with the IRandomRange was we passed in a minimum value and a maximum value, and then GameMaker would choose a number within that range. We're going to make use of this IRandomRange again here. And what we're going to use it for is a kind of multi-sided die. Imagine you've got like a dice or die that you're rolling in a game. We're going to use this, and the bigger the range of numbers we put in, the more sides there are going to be on our die. And the roll of the die is going to produce a given number. And what we're going to say is if a specific number is rolled, then we're going to create an instance of that demon. So how do we do this? Let's say that we want to create for our demon a 70-sided die. Okay, so we're going to say somewhere between 0 and 70. We want you to pick a number, and I want to store that number in a variable. So I'm going to use a local variable, and I can declare a local variable by using the keyword var. Give it a name. I'm going to call it create demon, and I'll say it equal to whatever number gets returned from this IRandomRange. Well, it's worth spending a moment to talk a little bit more about this. So we've already talked about variables, and we've created instance variables and talked about how they work, and we've worked with GameMaker's built-in variables. Now we're creating a local variable, and the way you let GameMaker know you're creating a local variable is through the use of this keyword var. If I type this and then give a name to a variable, GameMaker knows, okay, this is a local variable, but what is a local variable? A local variable is one that only lives for the length of time that this script is running. And as soon as the script is done running, this variable disappears. So, for example, I can't call this variable from some other script inside my program because it just doesn't exist. It only exists here inside this script and only for the time that it's running. And we don't really need this for anything other than right now as we're running the script. So it's a good candidate for a local variable. You might notice that I've got this little underscore at the beginning of the name I gave to this local variable. You don't have to do this. You could just call it anything you want. I put the underscore in there for a similar reason to why I call sprites SPR underscore and object OBJ underscore. It's just a naming scheme that's useful for me when I'm developing, because as I'm working with this variable, if I see an underscore, that immediately tells me, okay, this is a local variable. It's just my own naming convention. But it is useful, I think. Okay, so we're going to grab a number at random between 0 and 70. We're going to store it in this local variable, and then we want to make use of the number that we just recorded. So how do we do that? Well, we can pick any number, really. So let's say if create daemon is equal to literally anything. I'll just say 0. Let's keep it at 0. So we've got a 70-side dice. If we roll a 0, then we're going to create an instance, and this will look familiar. Instance create. We're going to use the layer, and we're going to position it now. We're going to put it at the boss's x coordinate minus 40. So it's going to move it off to the left of the boss by 40 pixels. And then at the boss's y coordinate, we'll just leave that at y. We're going to again put it on the instances layer, just like we did the fireball. And which one are we going to create? We're going to create the daemon object. So if we roll a 0, we're going to create an instance of the daemon object on the instances layer, and we're going to position it slightly to the left of our boss character. Now this is all taking place inside the step event, which means this is going to be called over and over and over and over and over 30 times a second. And because of that, it's pretty likely that sooner or later we're going to end up producing one of these daemon objects. Let's see what that looks like. There I am. Oh, here comes one, there comes another one. So now they're spitting out of the boss's mouth pretty regularly. There is something I don't really quite like how they're working. If they come shooting straight out, it works pretty well. But if they're coming out at one of those angles that I gave them, 220 or, oh gosh, I already forgot the other one, they just disappear off the top or the bottom of the screen, which is not really what I want. So I'm going to play around a little bit with that as well. And by going back into my daemon step script, so let's close this guy up, close this up, and we'll come back into our daemon. And let's see, what do we want to do? Well, we haven't called our daemon step script yet, so we better create that. Let's come up to our scripts, to the other critters, and open up our daemon script. And we want to check to see if this daemon object either hits the top of the room or the bottom of the room. We want it to turn around. I'll tell you, this is somewhat tricky, and it's not super important that you understand every detail of this. So I'm going to save us a little time and just explain what's happening here. So I've got here the script that will allow us to check for when the daemon hits the top of the room or the bottom of the room. So in some ways, it's similar to what we did with our boss, right? We're saying if y for this daemon is less than 0 or y is greater than room height minus 140. I don't like that. Let's say minus sprite height. Then we need to change its direction, right? So it's either hit the top of the room or it's hit the bottom of the room. But it's a little tricky because If it hits the top of the room, we want it to go a certain direction. If it hits the bottom of the room, we want it to go a different direction. So what I've done is I've nested in some more ifs here. And it allows us to check multiple kinds of cases that we need to account for. So if we're at the top of the bottom or the bottom of the room, top of the room or the bottom of the room, first we're going to check what is the direction currently. If the direction is greater or equal to the 220, then that means that the demon is sort of moving at an angle towards the bottom of the screen. And in that case, we need to modify the direction by subtracting 90 degrees from it. A little confusing, I know, but this is just through playing around I figured out how to get this to work appropriately. Otherwise, if the direction is less than or equal to 120, which means it's sort of moving at an angle up toward the top of the screen, then we're going to add 90 degrees to the current direction. And this is going to happen over and over and over and over again. I know that's a quick explanation, and I should probably do a better job, but it's not super important to the game, and I wanted to show you how that works. Well, I'm not seeing it working right now. They're just still disappearing off the bottom or the top of the screen, so we better take a look back again at our little demon here. Not because it's not there, it's because I didn't call it. Here we are in the step event. We need to call our demon step script, which is where that lives. That'll work. Okay, here they come. Boom, they hit the bottom. They bounce. They're going straight ahead, they're just fine. Boom, there's a bounce. I'd like to see one going up towards the top if I could. Oh, they're all like to go down apparently. But that's the idea. That'll help them bounce back in toward our player to cause trouble to the player.